There are some things in World of Tanks that genuinely shouldn't happen, and in all intents and purposes, I didn't believe that the Indian Panzer was ever capable of having great results. However, I've been proven wrong multiple times, and today's video is going to showcase exactly why that is. The Indian Panzer is something that I just don't believe it can actually do bad. This tank is really, really great, especially considering we're playing the stock version and I'm still having fun in this thing. I thought it would be like one of those mediocre mediums, something like a T-43, you know, the Russian Tier 7 medium tank, that's kind of just like meh. It's like, it is okay, but it's not really going to be able to do much. But the Indian Panzer is completely different, and that's because this tank has fantastic view range, it's got good mobility, it actually has armour that can sometimes work, which is, for a medium tank, unbelievable, let alone when you're playing in like Tier 9 battles and people actually bounce off your turret. Now, don't get me wrong, when you're playing in the +2, -2 and you're playing up against Tier 10s, especially tank destroyers, like, they don't care whether it's your turret or the hardest part of your armour. They're going to go right through this thing. It just doesn't have the flat armour values, but nonetheless, you can still have amazing results. And this is, of course, a top tier game in the Indian Panzer. And what we're doing here is kind of coming into this nice position at the start on this map, which is essentially airfield. This is literally just airfield. For those of you who either play or played before update 6.0, or for those of you that played after or played the PC version, this was a kind of previous map. So the one thing that I find about the Indian Panzer as opposed to a lot of the other tanks that you can play at Tier 8 is that this thing lends itself towards being very flexible, and of course flexibility in World of Tanks is something that a lot of tanks don't actually offer. So when you find one that does, you can kind of adapt your playstyle to however you want. You can play this thing aggressively, or you can play it a little bit more passively. I tend to opt to the kind of a hybrid approach where you're playing mainly as the forefront for your team, but always on the side that your team go. Like, this thing on its own is going to be terrible, like genuinely terrible. Yes, you have fairly okay DPM where you'll be able to kind of to negate a lot of the negatives that the team have. But if you're trying to take on 3, 4, 5 tanks all on your own on one singular flank, it's not going to go well. Yes, there are some tanks that can do that, the Object 279E, etc. But you definitely can't do it in the Indian Panzer, so you definitely don't want to be on the one side of the flank on your own. Well, you should always never be on one side of the flank on your own, but especially in something like this, make sure that you do get out of there using the mobility of the tank if you ever find yourself in that sort of situation. That's kind of accounts for all tanks that are medium tanks in World of Tanks. If you can get out of there, definitely do. Don't try and, you know, be the one that's holding the flank, but equally, like, don't try and run away when you're just going to get one shot by a TD as you're leaving. Like, you might as well try and make a stand. What you're seeing here is just kind of farming this AMX 1357, who for some reason just doesn't either care or genuinely doesn't realise that we're just shooting him in the side. Nonetheless, would take the damage any day of the week, and we've picked up 1400 damage to that effect. We've also got 624 assistance, and the assistance damage in the Indian is something that you can kind of rely on. Like, this tank has brilliant view range for a medium, and I suppose that's like it's because of the cupola, maybe, I don't even know. This tank is just brilliant in terms of getting both combined and spotting. You'll see me looking up there. I don't want to get hit by the artillery, especially when it's that tier 6 horrific tank, and I mean the Hummel. I absolutely despise the Hummel. It's one of the most ridiculous tier 6 artillery pieces, along with the M44, both of them being able to pen tier 8s and literally do them for like 700 damage. But nonetheless, forgetting about artillery for just a second, we'll move on towards the central part of the map, and you'll see me that I'm trying to get around because, of course, there is just one actual tank, 2 light tanks that are kind of surrounding the medium and tank destroyer, both of them on very nice amounts of hit points, so we need to be smart about it. I'm not just going to go in with them because ultimately the light tanks could get taken out in a couple of shots, and then I'm just left there against 2 tanks, which, as we said earlier, is something you definitely don't want to be doing in the Indian Panzer. So will take it from long distance. And because the accuracy of the Indian is really, really amazing, you can come into these sorts of positions. And one thing I want to note to you guys is that these are the 2 weak points of the bog horror. You see that side of the turret, if you can get that, or ultimately the cupola there that we were aiming at the top left of the turret. When you're looking at it frontally, then yeah, you can pen them pretty easily. Obviously we were loading premium, which you kind of need against the bog horror when you're trying to reliably pen them, so just use it. Don't complain that you have to fire it. If you want damage, that's just what you've got to do. If you don't, then don't complain, really. As much as a annoying statement that is, that's just how World of Tanks is sometimes. You genuinely just have to fire premium. Now, one thing that you'll note against the J Panther here is that he is sat out in the open, and of course, because he's sat out in the open, our artillery loves him, and so he's going to put a nice little chunky round into him. And now we spot the artillery piece here, who graciously misses us, so we're just going to farm him from full health now. An extra 410 damage onto our arsenal here, and he's gone. Now, the AMX AC-48 is not a tank you just want to be YOLOing, and so yeah, just be careful. The Hummel tries to flick us, and yes, we love taking out the Hummel. We got both artillery pieces, which is perfect. One of my favourite things to do in the game is hunt down those little artillery pieces that think that they're funny and that have been pestering you for the entire game. AMX AC-48 is here. Our medium tank is thinking he's obviously on the bottom side of the map. Obviously we know something slightly different, and our tank destroyer is coming on with a bit of support. I'm going to go up the hill. The tank destroyer on our team is going to go round, so either way we'll catch him in a little bit of a sausage sandwich, and we always love that. And you do have to be a little bit careful, as if he's going to come up from behind me at this point. So yeah, that was kind of a little bit of a risk, but I knew he's probably just camping in the bushes over there where I'm pinging on the map. Obviously that's where I think he was going to be. Is he actually over there? We're just cresting the ridge. We should be able to spot him if we can see him. You can see that there's a lot of bushes, and bushes mechanics are pretty disgusting, but he's not there anyway. I was being a bot. And we'll just place rounds into the side armour of the AMX. Now, one thing most people will do, they'll still aim at the front of the tank. No, of course, aim at the side, and because it's a French tank, the side armour is absolutely garbage, and that allows us to pick up some extra damage. Now, this was a really, really good result in all intents and purposes, and of course, in a tank that I just genuinely didn't think was any good. 3,500 damage, 1,700 assistance, 7 tanks destroyed, which is of course a pretty decent game. Mastery badge nonetheless, and yeah, let's jump into the next one. Now, it would be a little bit unfair to say that this tank is good unless we actually showcased that it can perform even in the worst of scenarios, and of course we're talking about a tier 10 game. We're playing on, of course, highway, and this is what happens, kind of where you cannot at all be the forefront for your team, because you have literally half the health of the majority of the enemy tanks that you'll be fighting. You also have way worse gun handling, you have worse everything when you're obviously -2 in a match, and therefore you have to be very careful. And what you're seeing here is what you have to do in these sorts of matchups, and unfortunately, like, I guess when you're -2, a lot of people kind of give up, whereas like I always find it a little bit of a challenge, one of those games where you just have to try your best to perform, and that is exactly what I like to do. Now you see I knocked down the bush, and that is not by accident, that is because we like to sit in the bush just to give us a little bit more camo. When you're playing in your medium tanks, it's always good to do that. You see me pre-aiming this King Dragon, don't know if we hit him. Obviously we don't have the proper zoom like PC have, which is a little bit annoying. Hopefully we'll get that eventually, where you can kind of zoom right out and above your tank so you can kind of see where you're shooting. But nonetheless, what you're seeing here is the King Dragon on the enemy team, and you can often catch people out if you take this sort of position. Now heavy tanks and stuff like that, and kind of more brawly TDs definitely shouldn't be just sat here. It's only really because I'm 2 tiers lower, and going into the town with this tank is an absolute like terrible idea. And also crossing's a terrible idea when you're in something like this, because you just get taken out super easy. There's a Conqueror that's out in the open, and we absolutely love when tanks go out into the open, because we can shut them down, and we can just keep tracking them over and over and over again. The Conqueror's looking directly at us, but we're going to take him out nonetheless. Now, with the Conqueror out of the game, we've now got a T124 who's kind of made it up, which is a little bit annoying, because you can often get side shots, and we'll talk about those side shots in a second. Meanwhile, we've got tanks approaching from the kind of northern side of the map, which, yeah, it's your typical highway game when no one actually goes anywhere but sitting on this hill. And yes, it is a problem. I am kind of adding to it, but equally, like, if I went over to that side, there'd be absolutely no point. I'm a tier 8. You can't carry in a tier 10 game one entire flank. And talking like at the beginning of the video where we talked about you can't carry one flank, especially in something like this, yeah, we weren't going to go over onto the other side. And you can see why it was a good idea, because there was about, what, 5 or 6 tanks, and most of them being tier 10, that we would have had to deal with. Now, I am kind of blind firing the E75 here, which is obviously something you can do. I was just trying to detrack him because I couldn't pen him at that angle, because we'd run out of premium rounds. And yeah, because I'm playing 2 tiers lower, you do actually have to fire a lot of premium rounds. It's not particularly the funnest, but there we go. Now then, picking up 1500 damage, 1200 assistance, and just trying to make it work in these sorts of games is something that I've always found a little bit of struggle. The Indian Panzer obviously is kind of one of those tanks that will perform the best when it is actually like the same tier. It's kind of doesn't take a brain genius or anything like that to be able to kind of work that one out. Like, it's pretty self-explanatory that when you're the top, you're going to be able to deal the best amount of damage. But what I mean by that is, like, some tanks can perform really well, and actually you can get way more damage in the games where you're like lower tier, because they're just genuinely more health to be able to kind of farm off of people. And the tanks that are kind of suited to that are usually ones that have a high alpha damage. Maybe they have they've got way better DPM, to the point where, like, if you find an opponent or you can continuously keep shooting, then you tend to do really, really well. Now, from this sort of point, we've had an okay game. Like, there's nothing that I can ever complain about. But what I kind of make the mistake of doing in the Indian is, like, at this sort of point, we can still actually be a little bit of a carry. And if I'd thought to myself, actually we should be moving into E6, E5 early enough, we could have spotted for our team, and we could have been getting shots onto the KV4. For some unbeknownst reason to me, I thought that breaking down this building would be a good idea, and getting rid of the hard cover in the cap circle, because Wargaming make brilliant game design. I absolutely hate hard like cover in the cap circle. Is the most annoying thing. It's like when you've been advancing for an entire like session, going into their spawn, and then for some reason you go back to your own spawn, and there's like this massive wall that's in the way, and you can't even decap when you get back there. Yeah, just it's like toxic, to be honest with you. Now, what we're doing here is just trying to reset the cap, because the KV forward has just decided he's going to get in there. It will make it easier for our cappers. Now, there are like 3 tanks on the enemy team that are progressing towards them, so it looks like we're probably just going to lose this game anyway, so might as well just try and make something of it. Our heavy tank that's been kind of moving back has obviously got caught up with this medium tank that's kind of pushing him back. We've got an E75 that's over on the left hand side that we're going to try and get a shot onto, and I make an absolute terrible misplay. And this is kind of what happens in the +2 -2. You know, I could showcase a game where I do really, really well, where I get 4k damage in a tier 10 game, but it's not really fair. It definitely wouldn't be like a fair fight, and of course that is what you'll be seeing a lot of the time in these tier 10 games. So no, the tank isn't broken. No, this tank isn't going to be able to survive and be able to do really well in all of the games that you're coming up against, but in the hands of someone that kind of knows how to play mediums, or someone that just wants to play a tank that isn't just purely overpowered but actually okay, then the Indian Panzer is brilliant, and you will definitely be surprised at how good this tank is, either in tier 8, tier 9 or tier 10 games. you will still be able to perform. And of course, I hope you enjoyed this video. This was one that I really enjoyed making, and of course, if you want to check out any more, then there will be the gameplay and tank reviews playlist on the right hand side of the screen, as well as the update news for the recent update coming on the left. So thank you very much for watching, and of course, I really hope you have a fantastic rest of your day and a fantastic rest of your week, and I'll see you there. Goodbye.